Bob gets nothing effect. Has that one taken away by Troy Hillman. It seems like this could be.
Hello and welcome to the Overwatch League recap, a talk show featuring the Overwatch League. I am BlazzinBob, and today I have two special guests, first of which is writer and podcaster extraordinaire, Yiska. What's going on?
Hey, thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is Yiska's first time to the show.
True.
I'm sure everybody who listens knows him. I do mention you and Tactical Crouch quite a bit because I really like that show. So
Thank you.
sometimes I agree, sometimes I don't, but I always see the point. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And then also we have Labasco, who's been on the show multiple times, caster and podcaster. What's going on, Labasco?
Glad to be here again, as always, Bob. You know, I always enjoy coming on with you and Mel whenever I get the opportunity.
Yep, no Mel today. Mel's got a lot going on. She's out of town, and so we're just going to have to get by without her, which is not going to be easy, but we will soldier on. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the melee games, but we're more going to focus, on what the league could look like for the rest of the year going forward, maybe next year changes and stuff of that nature. So a little look forward in this, time without Overwatch or without Overwatch League. We have contenders, we have a lot of stuff going on, but without Overwatch League. So not a ton of news, but should we jump into that Richard Lewis article to start with and just kind of go over that a little bit? It just dropped like 15 minutes ago. Sound good to you guys? All right, so we kind of skimmed this, but it looks like there was a lot more going on behind these scenes in Vancouver than any of us really knew. I mean, maybe Yiska knew, but I definitely didn't know. I don't know about you, Labasco.
There was always whisperings of things not going very well with the Vancouver Titans, and it even stems from before season 3. It stems at the end of last year. I mean, even in the finals, there was problems. So it it was one of those things where it just seemed to continue to escalate as we got closer and closer to the start of season 3. So like you had to be in some of the know though to find out about some of those things too. Like it's not something that was really publicly known for some of it. I mean, there were some things that were known, but a lot of it was just you had to just hear about it more than anything else.
Huh. Yeah, see, I must have been living under a rock because I really didn't know. And I mean, I feel like this is something I should have known or heard from somebody, but I was talking to you guys in the pre-show and you guys both knew so much more about this than I ever did. And I guess I was blinded by the success maybe and just didn't look into anything because I'll often look into teams that are doing poorly, like what's the problem, and then I'll, that's
Mhm.
one of the first things I'll look at. But this, I guess I was just like, if you're winning, everything's good. But you had some thoughts on this, Yiska.
Um, to be honest, like it sometimes it's a blur what is public and what it isn't, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Don't say
um,
anything that'll get anybody in any trouble.
no, of course not. But the point more is like it's hard to say how much the general public has found out through this article. I felt like other than maybe that they had an issue marketing the players locally, which is understandable to a degree, right? Like the merchandise sale. The thing is, and this is where I feel, and of course this is maybe it's ignorance, but especially the merchandise for a team of the magnitude that Runaway and then Vancouver Titans later became, it shouldn't be an issue selling merchandise globally.
Definitely not.
Maybe we'll have an
100% agree.
issue to fill up arenas consistently, but then again, I believe they only had 2 homestands. I think, like, depending on the size of the arena, they would have probably filled that up, or at least to a decent size. And I think they would have also gotten people to fly out for that specifically, because the importance of that team to Overwatch generally was this big. The fan base was this big of these players, of their story. Like, I got a little bit of flack for it at the time because I think I hyperbolized the importance, but a lot of very important storylines in Overwatch converge in the story of Runaway. You have the story of Lunatic High and the contrast. That's like two sides of the same coin, Runaway and Lunatic High in many ways. You later have the story of GC Busan, same story in the finals, Gesture and Profit in Apex Season 4, winning against that squad again. Then they make it also against players that are now considered like to be top tier talent. And this story goes on and on and on and on. They are Overwatch history and possibly the most important team we will ever have, but most definitely at the moment.
Well,
And
sorry.
Yeah. So, and to not be able to monetize this can only ever mean two things. Either nothing is monetizable in Overwatch League, or this team doesn't know how to monetize.
Well, I think one of their biggest problems is the Titans refuse to acknowledge the Runaway, where they could have run away with that story and really sold quite a bit. I mean, they could have helped themselves tremendously start of season 2 with just pink jerseys. I mean, that's my opinion. I could be wrong on that one, but
Could have been an alternate, like, too. Like, it didn't have to be like. It's understandable. Like, there are a lot of people in the northwest corner of the United States that were very happy that Vancouver picked colors that are very. And I'm saying United States, Canada is what I should say. But in that area, in the Vancouver area, that were very happy. Those are colors. The Seattle, Seattle is right next to Vancouver. They have teams that have those same colors. Vancouver's teams have those colors. I mean, they're literally the colors of the Vancouver Canucks, right? So, like, there was trying to add these two elements together, and it just never really seemed to do it, which it's weird that you can't like do an alternate jersey, which we've seen some cool ones come out. Like, Vancouver's were never like, I don't remember anything special about Vancouver's alternate jerseys that they ended up doing. There was really nothing. So you could have done something that incorporated Runaway. And to your point, Yiska, about like how Runaway is so intertwined into the Overwatch scene. We just literally had this morning Runaway versus Lunatic High show match for the anniversary of Overwatch, and you had over 60,000 people watching the stream on Twitch of the Apex broadcast that happened. So, like, there's still clearly some staying power for this team if a show match is getting that many people to watch it on a Twitch channel that I don't even remember the last time the Overwatch Korea Twitch channel was like something to pay attention to.
Yeah.
wait, so
Yeah,
it was
super
on
funny, right?
Twitch? And
It
not
was on Twitch
and not on
for the
YouTube?
Korean broadcast. It was.
Interesting. Okay.
Including the all the other broadcasters such as Flowerwin, and I think overall it added up with the YouTube viewership and all these streams to like a 140K peak or something like that, around
Wow.
about.
Around there.
So, of course, like, let's be honest, this is a monumental event in terms of nostalgia, and if something like this was to happen frequently, we wouldn't necessarily expect this to be a regular thing. I wonder if it still wouldn't be at least as much as the Overwatch League. Keep in mind, this didn't have drops, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So okay, so also we learned that the facilities that the Titans were in throughout all of season 2 and season 3 are pretty bad, right?
Season 2 was pretty good, but season 3 was more the thing. And here I have some sympathy towards the org, because, okay, here's the assumption that the org makes. We are going to travel a lot. I don't have it in my head how much that team would have traveled, but the amount of time these players would have stayed at that particular facility would have been, of course, much less if
Would have
it
been
wasn't for the
minimal.
pandemic.
Yeah.
So while it would have probably still been an issue, it wouldn't have been one to the extent that it was. But you still have to or adapt to the situation that life plays you, right?
Yep.
Like that's you cannot just roll over and say, well, these guys are in the basement and they're drinking. And that's, by the way, I don't think that was a big enough story. How that was on the Korean streams, they actively talked about them just sitting in their hotel rooms, having nothing to do, drinking every night, and for some of them, it was apparently, and I don't want to overemphasize because it was a translation, but it was to the point where it wasn't healthy anymore. And for instance, Roger Hong had to move in with a coach and stuff like that. So if it gets to that point, someone made a mistake. And
Well-
I'm not saying that it's that the players couldn't have maybe been more proactive in trying to incorporate maybe more variety. But then again, they are in a training facility, I believe 45 minutes out of the town center. Nobody can drive there. They don't have cars. And I don't know what the public transportation situation there is. So, of course, you kind of want to have a some variety and a game as mental as Overwatch. Like we're talking for other teams, we're talking about performance coaches. Here
Yeah.
we're just talking about keeping the mentals some sort of in check, doing the bare minimum of that. And a runaway that has the bare minimum of a good quality of life will win you games and might win you a season.
Yeah.
And that
just
was
with raw
probably all that
talent.
was required. Yeah.
Well, it's something we should mention is that in Korea, you are allowed to drink at 18, I believe. So it's not like they were doing
Oh, yeah,
something illegal. So just to
Mhm.
like clarify that for people that don't know.
I mean, it
it's-
was Jae Hong. He's 28, right? Like he's
Yeah.
Yeah, he's well able to drink, right?
Yeah, but I just I remember an interview we did with somebody, and they said they like to drink at the end. They're like, tell us something about you. They said they like to drink, and then the translator was like, just to let you know, it's legal in Korea. He doesn't drink here.
Mhm. Yeah.
Well, that's sort of like Jexay literally today just posted, I can finally drink in America now because he just turned of age.
Yeah,
So-
Hey, that's kind of
it's-
strange about you guys. Like, I gotta say,
It's super
like you
strange.
can drive a car at 16, but only drink at 21. For us, it's kind of the other way around, where you can only drive at 18, but you can have a beer at least at 16.
Well, see, but you guys have a lot better mass transportation. There's a lot of places in
Yes.
the U.S. that mass transportation is just not even a thing.
Yeah, that's true. It's
Like-
completely different. Once again, customizing towards the things that is required of you. You know?
Yeah, I personally think that kids shouldn't be able to drive till 18 because I shouldn't have been driving at 16. My gosh, I think I had all of my wrecks except for one before age 21, and then I have had one for like the last 20 years.
Mhm.
So it's
Mhm.
crazy. But yeah, the drinking thing is definitely weird. I don't get that either. Like you can go to war, but you can't have a drink. It's a little bizarre. But we
Yeah.
also had prohibition here, so that's a whole nother conversation. We're talking about Overwatch.
Which oddly still kind of is relevant to the situation of Overwatch.
Yeah.
Oh, so yeah, so all in all, it just looked like a really bad thing. I guess the highest paid player was on the team was Fissure, and he came in late. That probably caused some animosity on the team, but there was no comment from him. Is there anything else you guys wanted to kind of pull out of this article? It is a super long article, so
Mhm.
I implore everybody to go read it yourselves. I
Mhm.
still have just skimmed it, so I'm gonna have to read it too.
Yeah, pretty much the same. I don't know if there's any new information other than that out there. It was definitely like good to see it all in one place. But I would have to look how it compares to the Kotaku piece, for instance.
Yeah, well, and you gotta, Richard Lewis is a good writer, but he does hate Overwatch League. So, I mean, he's that's that's his words, not mine. So I don't know. It's definitely bad, but we hope that they're able to come back because I don't know. We need we need good teams in the Overwatch League, and we need good
Good players.
organizations. Yeah, well, I hope all the players find a place. Some have found 2-week contracts, but still no word on uh, on Haskell, right?
Not yet.
Yeah. No.
But that's
But
I
he
I think
said
that's
it's
the key
going
word.
soon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, let's just move into talking a little bit about the melee. Now, did either of you catch a lot of the uh the Asia bracket? Did you guys did you guys see a lot of that? I didn't see a ton of it.
I saw a good amount of it. I thought it had some of the best games in my opinion of both tournaments.
Well,
Mhm.
okay, well then okay, here's something I want to talk about. What's up with New York? Like, is New York no longer the team that they were? Like, are they
Mm.
meta dependent? Like,
Yeah.
I
I think that's basically what's it's hard to say at this point, right? Because
Yeah.
there's volatility in every hero pool. Even if there's no hero pool, that is still a meta that's being introduced that week. And um, with New York specifically, we know that New York, at least last season, was kind of slow to the new metas and worry about all about their perfection because of also about a more defensive playstyle that inherently requires a deep understanding of how a specific comp is played. Now, this doesn't necessarily translate into the season. New head coach, new flex tank. Also, who are you is playing a bunch, and that definitely shaped their general approach, I would say, to Overwatch. Um, but then again, it's while I find it very hard to pinpoint how good teams are in general, it's also the case that they are arguably in the more dense, in the more competitive season is region. If you consider the distance between the worst teams and the best team,
yeah.
because I think maybe the worst team is maybe Spark or London, maybe Chengdu. These teams they can still take maps and matches off of Shanghai at times, right?
Yeah, well,
So
and I
yeah,
feel like New York last year, I feel like they didn't look good the whole year, but their record says differently. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like they looked slow. It looked
it's
like they
weird.
were
Yeah,
barely winning, but they were still winning, and they had a great record. And this year, it's definitely not that. But I also think you mentioned Who Are You, and I thought he was going to be really really good, right? But I wonder if he's like a decay situation where he's just not performing well with this team, or he's just not getting it yet, and he might turn out to be really good come the future. And maybe that's what they see, and that's why they're forcing him a lot. But it seems like they are playing a lot of different roster choices. What do you think, Lobo?
I think he's been playing all right. I mean, I think it was his Echo was top 5 as far as I think the damage numbers that he was doing. Like there were some of the statistical parts of Who Are You's gameplay on Echo at the very least that show that he's a pretty good Echo. For New York, it just it feels like season 1 New York, they had an identity, right? Like you knew who the New York Excelsior were. Season 2, it felt like they were in the worst division and they were just beating up on teams that they should have been beating
Oh,
up
that's a
on.
good point. That's a
yeah,
good point.
You know,
yeah.
they weren't playing consistently the Vancouver Titans, the San Francisco Shocks of the world that season. So it became a story that really was like, okay, well, what are they going to do when they play them? And they just never played well against those teams. This season, the identity just doesn't seem to be there at all. Like I don't know what the New York Excelsior are supposed to be as a team. We see them sometimes force Who Are You's Genji on maps, which makes no sense at all whatsoever. Like there's a lot of things that I just can't pinpoint to like what Yiska was saying, where it's like, I don't know what New York is. And it makes it very difficult to get a read on them because you'll see them play really well in one game, and then they'll get 3-0'd by the New York Excelsior. Or they'll get 3-0'd by the Shanghai Dragons,
Mhm.
which, a really good team, obviously, but that's a team that they need to be competing with. Like, that's
Yeah.
the expectation on that team. And it's what makes them like this sort of forgotten team almost a little bit, because it's like, yeah, they have talented players, like there's no question about that. They'll look really good at times, and then they'll look really bad. Like it's but it's different than like what we would say from like how the London Spitfire used to be, as far as why they would look good and why they would look bad. Like, I don't think this is a team disinterested in Overwatch at times. I think that the New York Excelsior are a team that are a little bit more dedicated than some of the other teams, but
Mhm.
they can't see, and I don't know why they can't figure it out, but it just seems like they can't put everything together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think one aspect I've been entertaining, where I don't know if that's actually the case because I don't know the scrim structures,
Mhm.
but basically, okay, the way teams practice is we have this term called scrim bubbles, right?
Yep.
So you of course don't want to practice against your direct opponents in the week, or maybe not even in the week after, depending on what the situation is in terms of like um uh who's off, who's not, these types
Right.
of situations. So um I thought when we had Christopher on, he talked about the Torp virus. The Torp virus was a situation in the
I'm on fire.
beginning of in the beginning of Hero Pools. What was like, they had a rigid meta, and I believe he was even on during the time and saying, okay, Chips is going to play because they wanted to play Doomfist. That was on, I believe it was Wednesday. Suddenly, on either Thursday or Friday, someone has a Torbjorn comp that definitely beats Doomfist. So, what do? Do you just stick to playing the Torb comp, or do you press through? And the the if you think about, like, one team thinks of the composition, they scrim another team. That's team that then was beaten by Torb goes into the next scrim block, and it disseminates that way. Now, the more teams you have to compete against, the quicker the virus spreads. So probably, if everyone plays 3 scrim blocks and you have the first block on Tuesday, by Wednesday everyone knows what everyone's
Mhm.
playing in NA. I don't think that's the case for Asia, and I think my theory is that this information just disseminates much less quickly to the other teams. So some teams, like the team that actually innovates, has a couple of days head start on the team that then gets to it on Thursday or Friday, and they therefore get beaten. Because if I look at the results in Asia, they are consistently inconsistent
Yes, I was about.
generally.
I was like, wait, are you gonna say they're consistent? I was like, no.
And to that end too, like New York, as far as compositional wise in the playoffs, they were like one of the teams furthest from what ended up being the iteration that was most
Yeah.
prevalent in the Asian scene.
Yes.
That just holds weight from what we've seen too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and when everybody was in LA, it went really quickly. I mean, espionage was everywhere, and
Yeah.
everybody was talking to everybody. Have a couple beers with this guy from this team, and all of a sudden you're talking about this. I mean, that was going on rampantly. Oh, but yeah, I mean, so maybe even without hero pools, we might have had some differences, but I don't. I'm still not sure on that. But
Mhm.
what about Soul Dynasty? Soul Dynasty, I think, is cursed.
From one enigma to the next.
Yeah, I mean, I just think they're cursed. Like, some people say they're meta dependent, but I don't know. Like,
Yeah.
I think they've played good on some meta, on the same meta, and bad on the same meta at different times. And sometimes Prophet looks amazing. Sometimes Prophet looks like he's confused.
Mhm. Yeah. I think so. I thought we had a good working theory how Seoul Dynasty worked, where it was like, okay, they're a good team. Then they moved to Asia. Like we already hear scrim rumors that they aren't performing that well in scrims. And that's why Super said like one team is going to get exposed, and we can infer that he meant Shanghai was going to beat on Seoul. And at the time that was true. And so they come into the region, and then they actually in the rematch beat Shanghai Dragons by playing double shield. We're all like, oh yeah. So apparently like there are different signals. Then they go on, get clapped by the other I think it was Spark in Guangzhou, right? Was it those two games?
I think
I think that was the two.
0-3 both times. And it's like, okay, that apparently they can only play one meta, because if you look at the pattern, it is double shield tank. Okay, so we have figured that out. Then there is like a situation where they can play double shield technically, but not with Orisa, because Orisa is banned. And they still aren't good. Okay, so it's like, okay, makes sense. Jesha is a good Orisa. So that's their island. That's where they're on. And then they come out in May Melee and completely build up this new continent that they're on in this metaphor, and just like deliver on other comps as well. And that to me was very confusing, and also maybe a slight death to that theory, and also something maybe something changed in the coaching structure. Of course, they also had different substitutions. Let's keep in mind a lot of the players were able to play their strongest heroes because of the no hero pool situation. That certainly contributed to it. So I'm not sure if we can entirely say or predict what Seoul Dynasty will do in the future, but I think that tournament expanded our expectations, what we can sort of see from them.
Yeah,
Especially like for Seoul specifically, I feel like part of their evolution as a team in the tournament is the evolution of Marvel as becoming an actual off tank, like being able to play a competent diva, which we saw him do in the melee. Where if you look at some of the games previous to that, the question is why are they playing a main tank on an off tank when they have Michelle? And that was one of the things that we saw change, I think, a little bit in the May Melee specifically. But that is part of what needs to continue for Seoul if this trend is going to continue going in that way. So I think that's part of it as well, where certain parts becoming more comfortable in the roles that they now have. But there's a lot to it more than just that.
Yeah, it's also weird that they then went, okay, so it's a bias market. There's a lot of players that we can choose from this amazing roster. We aren't even playing our off tank on the off tank position.
Yeah,
I was like, okay, the signals are all there. Janu's going there. He has a Sigma. He has a Diva, and then it's Slime for some reason. Even though Toby hasn't been a liability, generally where those players have ended up makes very little sense to me. I'll be honest.
Yeah,
Other than the shock thing with the rationalization from Krusty, where he says, "Okay, what do we do when we have two flex supports?" Then again, I still don't know how that team looks when Moth is not consistently on the server to guide them and give them like the hard strategies or tactics that they're running. So, in general, I'm very surprised where these guys ended up with their careers.
And I think there's a lot of change going on in Overwatch this season, just Overwatch the game in general, where flex tanks, main tanks, flex supports, main supports are kind of gelling together with the introduction of double shields and things of this nature, where like it might turn into where we're just talking tanks and supports, in 2 years with the amount of heroes we have. So it could be that too, because the lines used to be real cut and dry, and now they're a little blurry.
Yeah, I don't think I ever expected to see Moth play as much Zenyatta as he has over the past few weeks. So yeah, the lines have definitely blurred.
Yeah, it's funny because I remember we called them flex supports and flex tanks, even though they were playing Diva pretty much for 2 years exclusively. There was nothing flexible about flex tanks. And now they are flex tanks, and we call them off tanks. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's good to have those but it's definitely with the more they keep adding, and if they don't make significant changes in Overwatch 2, I just don't know that we're gonna have those, those different
Defined roles.
categories. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so Shanghai Dragons is definitely the best team in Asia. In my I mean, like, there's some talk about NA, but in Asia, Shanghai's got it, right?
I don't think there's a question. I mean,
Yeah.
especially with their performance in the May Melee, like that was a great game against Seoul, and I thought Shanghai played particularly bad too in the finals, even though not the entire time, but on specific maps they just didn't look very good, and then towards the end they seemed to turn it on. So I think that they definitely have the high. Maybe you can argue Shanghai, but or Seoul, but I think Shanghai is the highest ceiling of any of the teams in that region too.
I think you could
Yeah.
even argue just over the last couple weeks, Guangzhou Charge, uh, even though they lost in the melee, like I'm not sure that they're not on the up and coming too.
Yeah, it's just rough for them because of the lack of Nero and Neptune at the moment, right? Like, it's basically like there's a lot of wounded teams in the Overwatch League. If you think about it, like
Yeah.
Paris was to a large degree that because they didn't have Sparkle yet, and
And
they also had
getting hurt.
exactly Jesus. To a degree, that was I would say even Valiant was like this. Maybe not from a player point of view, but like from a coaching point of view and staff and support in that regard. Um, there's definitely teams that measure with unequal opportunities and options, and it's kind of sad because Guangzhou looked like they were carving out the second we're the second best in this region position, and then with the setbacks also because of visa issues, it's of course rough for them to catch up. And I think at this point it is mighty weird, but you probably would have to say Seoul as the second best in the Asian region.
Okay. Okay.
A-
Yeah, I
and
mean,
the char-
at least for now, until you know.
yeah. Well, the Charge sort of have that New York thing of last year where they're not getting as talked about as much as some of the other teams in the region. Like people talk more about the Seoul Dynasty than they do the Charge, even though the Charge have had the better record, have looked like the better team more consistently. So it's like they're just sort of in that position where like they sort of are flying under the radar a little bit more than some of the other teams, and it's unfortunate because they are a talented team and they've played some really good games, and I think part of it has to do with sort of some of the issues that they're having with visas and everything, but also just because they end up losing 3-2 in a semifinal to a team that people were talking more about because of how disastrous they have.
Mm.
Yeah, and Echo's also shaken up a lot the last few weeks. It's been a lot of things crazy, like
Mhm.
like Nico on Paris going from an average DPS to a god Echo,
Yeah.
overnight. Like it's just like what happened? What happened? But
Yeah.
good for him, right? Let's talk about the
Real quick,
Go
that
ahead.
actually Nico coming out on Doomfist actually made me look up or ask around what the security measures are for players in terms of like, is Sparkle sitting down at his PC right now? Like, this is nuts. He was like, especially in that Houston game, I was like, okay, in my mind, Blasi is like a top 3 Doomfist.
Yeah.
Nutter from the games beforehand. And then he comes in and honestly like demolishes Blase in that manner, and I was like,
Yeah.
okay,
What's going on
where did
here?
that come from?
Yeah, what's
It's like-
going on here? And
It's like Sparkle, what you doing?
Yeah,
yeah,
but
and
Give a
it
Sparkle
could be.
can.
rest assured, everything is kosher there, of course. But
I mean,
Yeah.
and it could be just a confidence thing. Like he gets some confidence on Echo, and then because I mean, at one time he was looked at as a really good DPS. So who knows? But let's talk
I'll-
about. Oh, go ahead.
real quick, I'll say, like, I don't think we hold Nico in the regard that we should, because this guy literally won the first Overwatch tournament ever with Melty in 2015. Like, second day of open beta, they had like a tournament there, and they then dominated EU for a long time. Also came over to some NA events. They were pretty good. Okay, they dropped off pretty quickly, but again, he's been literally day one winning. Then went through Rogue. Yes, he had a pretty rough first couple of years in Overwatch League, but now that he's popping off like that, like that's a Hall of Famer career.
Yeah.
Yeah, was it Nico also part of the famous Eagle Gaming too?
Yes.
Right? So like this is somebody who is steeped in the EU lore of Overwatch for sure, and just Overwatch in general. So yeah, I don't know why he's always one that hasn't been talked about more. It is definitely
Mm.
an odd thing. Like he is a good DPS player. Obviously, I'm curious to see how things are going to change now that Sparkle comes into the mix because he's finally of age. So things will
Yeah.
maybe change a little bit there, but that doesn't mean Nico goes away either.
I don't think so. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it could just mean soon goes away. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that can happen now, and like we were talking about, the lines are blurring. Sometimes you're going double hit scan, sometimes you're going double projectile. I We'll just have to see. But let's talk about the NA.
Yeah.
So of course I've always got to talk a little bit about the Dallas Fuel because I'm a Fuel fan, and maybe I shouldn't be doing this show, but I am. So sorry. I've heard a lot of people talking about the San Francisco Fuel game, and I think a lot of people are not giving Fuel the props that they deserve. I mean, they dumpstered San Francisco on the first map, and then San Francisco barely won every map after that. But I mean, at the same time, Dallas Fuel full holds San Francisco on Rialto, and then San Francisco full holds just a little bit more. I mean, but they were going at it, and I mean, really every game that they've played, this is the third one they've played against each other this season, has been pretty close. First one, maybe not as close, but pretty close. So is San Francisco not as good as we think they are, or is Dallas Fuel actually a contender when Decay pops off?
It's like a
Um,
caveat there, isn't it?
Well, it's not a big one, right? Like
Yeah, not
basically
a yeah.
always
He's kind
pops
of
off.
always popping off, right? Yeah.
Yeah. He's actually I thought, and I think that's one of the definite downsides of Goats was that this delayed the arrival of Decay a lot, because this guy has been doing it for a while and he just wasn't of age. And then season 2 comes around and he can't play the DPS heroes he's known for. Never really performed badly, but couldn't perform to what he's able to do now. And it's not even like a fissure situation, like well, it's like a situation where a team just puts a lot of resources in their carry player and he performs. Decay does it with moderate resources that you would expect every other DPS player to get. So it's unfortunate for now that Dallas doesn't have the win record to back it up, because otherwise, like, and this probably should be incorporated to a degree into the argument of a season MVP, but from a personal performance, he's probably there over the entire season so far. Of course, most teams aren't even halfway through, and we don't know if 28 games will still remain, or we don't know anything, basically.
Yeah.
If we're being honest.
Yeah, nothing.
We really don't. Yeah. It's like we know that there's a June melee, but we don't know if they're gonna do it the same way they did the May one. Like,
Yeah.
Oh, and
no
we're going to
idea
talk
of
about that
anything.
for sure.
Mhm.
But to Yiska's point, it makes it hard to know, like, is Dallas going to have the opportunity to really make a comeback, because they're clearly not the same team they were at the beginning of the season. So it does bring that into question, if we'll get to see them a little bit more, if they'll get stuck playing an early round against one of the best teams, or if they'll be able to move on and then play those teams later on in a tournament format. But I think if if you're a Dallas Fuel fan, like you've been waiting just to have something positive about the
Heck
team for so long.
yes. Heck
You're happy
yes.
for this anyway. Like
Yeah.
whatever, we're competing. They are competing with
Hmm.
teams like San Francisco, so like that at least is something that you can be happy about. I do think it's a little bit more that Dallas has gotten better than San Francisco has gotten worse as far as your question about why has this looked the way it has between these two teams. But it's also like for Dallas, it's like it's been a long time coming. Like they're one of the more popular teams, so like it's almost expected that they should have gotten to this point sooner too.
Yes, definitely. And I just also wonder with their performance against other teams and stuff, if maybe just they, you know, some teams have other teams' number. I'm just wondering if Dallas just has San Francisco's number, but San Francisco's just better and does come out on top, but it always looks close. That's what I wonder if they just play well uh, against each other with their two different styles. But I don't know.
It's a good question. I think Dallas is actually legitimately this good.
Yeah,
Um,
I agree.
they're probably a top five team in NA. I would have to. I love when people make these statements. They're top five, and then there are like 9 people in there. So, but yeah, I think it's getting there. I thought the statement that Super made saying they're top 3 was a little outrageous, but
Yeah.
that almost excludes. Like, we asked Dream who he thought the best team in North America was, and he said Philly Fusion. Interesting.
That's actually who I say too. I listened to that episode and it was about half and half with Dream on of whether I agreed or not, but I definitely agreed. And we can just talk about that now. Like, let's talk about the San Francisco. Oh wait, no, not it wasn't
You mean Florida,
the
Philly?
Florida. Yeah, Philly
Mhm.
did not look like I don't think that was both of those teams' best games. I think that was the Mayhem's best game, but like the Fusion did not look like the Fusion at all. I mean, their supports were getting caught out constantly when that would just was never happening. I mean, we've been talking about them as the best support line in NA forever, and I think both of you have been on the same page,
Mhm.
with that. And they didn't look good. Carpe didn't look good. He looked confused. And I figured they'd be great because they could do their double shield thing, but they just didn't look like them. I wondered if you guys saw something different.
As far
I
as that, go ahead.
sorry. Just my point is really quick. I think they just had a bad meta, and Florida got a very good one for themselves. I don't think you can legitimately, just like how the best meta composition fell. I think that is almost the optimum for Florida Mayhem. So that definitely helped them a lot. Generally, in aggregate over the season so far, I think you would have to say that Fusion are the best team in North America, but they caught a bad hero pool in that specific instance. And I also think they would have won the final against the Shock.
But I mean, there wasn't a pool. They could pick anything. You just think the way the meta shaped out for that no hero pool.
Yes.
I guess no hero
Yes.
pools is kind of a pool now.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep, makes sense. What do you
And,
think,
and
Lobo?
I think it, for Philadelphia, I want to think of them as such a good team. Like it's fun when Philadelphia is good for sure.
Hmm.
I do think there's a little bit to that. I do think this has also sort of been the rising of the Florida Mayhem. I do think that they're a better team than myself included gave them credit for.
Yep,
So
Hmm.
same.
I I they didn't play anybody leading up into the melee, and it's like, well, what are they going to do as the second seed? And
Yeah.
they manhandled Philly in that game. They did.
Hmm.
Like
Hmm.
I think for as
It
bad as
was
Philly
bad.
looked, like Alarm and Funny Astro still had moments where they looked really good though in that game. It's
Hmm.
not like they were completely having the worst game of their careers. Like I think Florida needs to get maybe a little bit more credit, especially because it was such a good series too against San Francisco that they played.
Yeah.
But I do think This has sort of been the thing with Philadelphia. We've seen them be so consistent this season. So the fact that they do have that little bit of falter, I think you do blame a little bit on the meta. But I think a
Mm.
team as good as Philadelphia and with the players with the range that they have, I feel like a meta excuse is just that. It's an excuse. Like this is a team that should be a little bit more insulated from meta changes than what they had here in the main.
And they've looked like that all season, and so
Exactly.
it's definitely interesting to see Mayhem do so good. And I was definitely on that trade too, but I was on the trade where like I don't know if they're good. They've handily handled the bad teams that they've played, but I don't know that that translates into winning against the good teams. But they definitely proved it, didn't they?
Mm.
And I wonder if that comes down to coaching. And I mean, because they had what 3 games leading up to the finals, and in quick succession, like the final was played that day later.
Yeah.
So, all right, let's talk about the actual final and what happened, and then we'll get on to our final topic, which is a big one.
Well, I thought the final was really good between these teams. I thought San Francisco, though, once they sort of figured out the Florida Mayhem, it felt like they just knew what they needed to do to win, and then Florida didn't really have an answer back. Like it was a good final, especially those first few games where they're trading back and forth, but then it just seemed like something clicked for San Francisco, and that's when everything changed in the whole series.
Yeah, I had a thought on what clicked too, and now I'm blanking. Uh, what? Who did they kept singling someone out? San Francisco did, and that
Um,
uh, that basically started the change. Ah, shoot, I don't know.
mhm.
Whatever. I mean, everybody's talked about it. It was a week ago. Let's move into what I really wanted to talk about today. Sorry. So tournaments. First off, we doubled viewership with the melee. Now, what I thought was weird was that they turned on drops that same week. What are your opinions? Do you think it was the drops, or do you think it was the tournament that actually brought up the audience count?
I I
It's
think
an
it's of course a
impossible
bit of
question.
both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, I will say it. I wonder if they have very good tools to determine if it was either or by looking at the unpersonalized data of the types of viewers that were watching or whatever it is,
They should
because
be
it's
able to, because they would have had to log in and then watch through
true.
Overwatch League, yeah.
yeah, their betting. So they should be able to see that if they wanted to tell us.
Yeah. Um, I think it's cynical me says this keeps a backdoor for plausible deniability of like if they don't want to do tournaments for whatever reason because it doesn't vibe with the owners or whatever with what the league is trying to do, can just pawn that
Oh,
off to the.
interesting. You think
I'm
it
I'm not
was
not
Oh,
sure
well,
if that.
you're
Yeah,
speculating it could have been that.
yeah, that's just my cynical choice because um it's also pretty much the same with this tournament that happened today. It's like, why do you introduce so many new factors in trying to test this product? Like you have the new production of, or not new, but the old production of Apex. You have great teams, and then you also have this ban system, which I cannot see a world where that wasn't okayed by Team Four. Like
It
it's on
had
the
to have,
owl
yeah.
channel. You get the owl casters. That has gone through. That experience has gone through Team Four. So now, how do you determine what actually contributed how much towards that viewership explosion? How do you make the experiment there?
That's a really
And
good point.
it's hard to for me to see how how this all relates. Maybe that needs to be in an experimental card in some way, or just like to see if that is something that could vibe with a general audience. I'm also really like, I'm kind of skipped, or the thing is like, this is already where the nose starts tingling, where it's like, why do we have such a big break right now? What are they trying to figure out? Is another
Yeah.
big change coming to us? Are we going to have hero bands being introduced like this season as well? Like
Are
that's
they
of
testing
course,
it now?
Right.
it's so weird, right? How this all like falls together. But yeah, I think in terms of the drops, I thought last year and first year it was about 30K viewers that drops contributed towards the stream, and I think still this probably was now significantly less. I would say like 15, 20K is like the drop bonus, and then the rest is the tournament format. And that you saw that in the peaks. I think peaks were 87, something like that during the
Yeah,
final.
they were up
Yeah.
there.
So really solid, yeah.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
think you real quick before you go, Labasco, I wanted to say, like, with introducing multiple factors, reminds me of Overwatch's balancing as a whole, going across the entire game's existence. Instead of we're going to reduce this, it's always we're reducing this, raising this, extending this, go on one character, instead of like testing one thing at a time. They're always doing that. So it's kind of a trend for just Overwatch in general. But sorry,
It
Lobo.
yeah, it's like the main melee is definitely something that seemed to add a little bit of excitement. Like I agree, it's feels like it was a combination of things. I like the way that they led into the melee tournament too, where you have a couple of games to determine seeding and everything. And you still have the importance of the regular season. You still have where consistent play is something that's going to be rewarded. I think that's an important thing as far as competitive integrity. So I like that they're trying to sort of implement something that comes from traditional sports and something that is very esports centric, right? Like tournaments are always been how esports have been going. Like you look at things like CS:GO, like you know they don't have a regular season of any kind. Like their tournament formats have changed. They've got tournament points and whatever, but like I like the combination of the two. I think trying to you have to appease to so many different people with what you're trying to do that it gets to a point where it's like you're maybe never going to get it right, but you have to at least admire the fact that they're trying to. Like they
Mhm.
are giving things that people are asking for. Like people have been asking for these tournaments. A lot
Yeah.
of people have already made these suggestions to them, of course, though, too.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
it's fallen on deaf ears. But I'd rather see something happening than nothing happening. So I totally get the cynical part of everything with this too,
Hmm.
but I'm at least happy that we are seeing them try and get this right. Like Overwatch, the game itself, like people still like if there's one thing that what just happened today and just from previous things and a lot of the words that I've seen people say they love Overwatch, they don't love the state of Overwatch, right? Like
Hmm.
that's where the bigger issue is.
Hmm.
So if you do your best to try and make it right for those people, then they will come back. But it's
Hmm.
about finding what's going to work and what's going to work the best. And I don't think we found that yet, but it is promising knowing that they aren't afraid, especially I mean with the state of the world and COVID, like COVID has given us the chance for this to probably
Yes.
even happen too.
Yeah.
Like it's bad to say because obviously what's happening in the world is one of the worst things, right? But it's allowed for a league that one has very big investors behind it. Like, all right, go ahead, do what you can. Like this season is lost as far as what they were trying to do anyway. So
Hmm.
I think that we're seeing iteration we wouldn't have seen otherwise. So I'm happy that we're getting something happening, but
Yeah,
I don't know if it's going to be enough. I still don't.
yeah, it's a good time for trying out new things. I will say I loved the melee, but I also was extremely upset at this. When they when they announced that we weren't going to have stage playoffs. I loved stage playoffs and thought they were great for
So
the
good.
league. Like,
Mhm.
it gave you like something to work for each stage, and then even in stage 3, like when you're not competing for you're out of it. You're not gonna make it to grand finals, like, you're not making playoffs, but you could still win that stage, and, that's exciting and keeps people invested in their teams that aren't doing as good and gives, a rejuvenation each at the start of each stage. Like, I personally saw on our podcast, every start of the next stage, our numbers would jump up because people were getting back into it that had kind of been like, like my team's not doing good. And that's just my guess. I have no clue if that's why they were jumping up. They could have been jumping up because of the stage finals too, like, but would we want the tournaments? Would we want it just pure tournaments? Because how do you do seeding? Other problems. If it's pure tournaments, you're gonna get to see a lot more of the good teams and a lot less of the bad teams, and that's just gonna compile. So I don't know what's like. Do you want just tournaments, or do you guys still like the league format?
I'm okay
I'm
with the
gonna.
league format.
Mhm.
I I'm I'm okay with having I consistency I think is an important thing in any sort of esport or sport, right? Like your ability to play throughout an entire season. Now, the tournaments itself though add another element too because you're giving incentive. There's something exciting to watch, right? Like a lot of people already have said this before. They don't find regular season games important because there's so many that the importance of one game isn't the same as a tournament game.
Mhm.
There's just no way around it, right? So
Mhm.
how do you cross that line of balance of competitive integrity along with having something that's exciting for people to watch? You have a couple of regular season games that then determine your seating for end of month tournament like that. I think that's a pretty good compromise of having both of those things. So for me this works out, and you've incentivized teams that are maybe at the bottom that didn't have a good, you know, couple of regular season games for the seeding round into the tournament. I win this tournament, I still have a reason to try and make it to the end. Because certain one thing with tournaments is you still have a degree of variability or of variables that can bounce out a great team. Like a San Francisco shot can still lose in an early round, or the Guangzhou Charge can lose to a team that got really hot at the right time. So it's about finding that balance, and for me, this works. Like this is something that I can get behind.
What
Yeah.
about you, Yiska?
Well, a purist in me probably would like tournaments more, and also to be have them spread a little bit. Like when our Overwatch League was announced, I was honestly kind of disappointed. I wanted, because
Interesting.
I came like from the other esports, just like following these circuits all around the world was a really cool experience. Every game mattered. But then when I saw the stage playoff stuff, I was like, yeah, this actually, because keep in mind, also coming from a European standpoint, it's still a very different league experience. Like we don't have
Yeah,
playoffs, but what we do have is, other than like the midfield, almost every game, especially towards the end of the season, is very important for everyone. Like the bottom teams could be relegated. The top teams are fighting for Champions League spots, for Europe League spots, um, for relegation spot. These types of things, and most of the time they are within a point range where everyone's fighting for something, and that didn't feel itself represent like
yeah,
teams like who are mathematically excluded from competition without stage playoffs didn't really have anything to play for. So I was like, okay, with all of that, like, how is that better for even for from an owner's point of view? When I'm a losing franchise, like, yes, I still have the games, but the excitement of that and the likelihood, unless I can spin a narrative like the Shanghai Dragons, this tragedy, then I'm probably not going to market to anyone with the team I have. So I when that thing came around, everyone was talking about, yeah, let's all do tournaments. Like I remember Monty saying, we've 20 years of experience in esports and tournaments, and the value of that. Like we know have the proof of concept. I agree, there's a proof of concept. I agree, it would probably be more overall exciting. Then again, I think if we evaluate the value that organizations get from this, and also it's not just that we have um, like a boring experience with these regular season games. They matter to some degree,
Yeah.
but I think there's always like a duality to it, where it's like by having regular season games, that makes the tournaments more exciting as well, and you don't have that like over like people getting too into that. Like there's the contrast of like, okay, regular season game, and while that might still not be in aggregate as exciting as just tournaments, it's
Right.
not a huge net loss, but it is probably, and of course, like me talking about business, but it is probably worth it to just like meet the owners in the middle and say, okay, we understand, like only tournaments, unless we have like a system where we play complete groups, and at least in the group stages, like everyone plays like 5-6 games, and then it's only like 3 more to win the final. Like unless we have a system like that, the owners are not getting the value that they've paid for. Like if I'm paying this much to get into this league, I want to be like have enough
Equal
screen time to.
representative, yeah.
Yep.
So the purist in me, tournaments only, but the realist, also as someone that wants to see this grow, probably has to consider regular season games. And also, I don't think it's this bad because of the contrast of like, okay, we're getting closer. Ah, nice, we have a tournament again, and that's really important towards the end of the season in that regard. So overall, if we can come in on that solution, and it will in some ways create unlucky formats. Like for instance, let's say the Florida Mayhem are only a mid-tier team this tournament. For instance, they had a ridiculously easy schedule to qualify. They played, I think, Boston twice when they were still bad, or once. They had Toronto when they were struggling, and they had Houston. That's a 3-0 that puts you in a bracket where you already get an auto win, pretty much.
Yep.
Right? So that is kind of a downside of that seeding that we're choosing to do, but it's no system's perfect.
Yeah.
So I actually quite like it how it is.
And I mean, I could, the regular season games, they might not be as popular or as important, but if you did have them every time leading up to some, and maybe it doesn't even have to be every month, maybe it's 5 weeks or something like that. But if you have them leading up to it, it at least builds storylines, and I think it actually makes the tournament more popular and more exciting because of that. Where if you just have just tournaments, I don't know that you could get that. And I mean, the Melee having the tournament on one weekend was, I mean, it was a lot of Overwatch to watch.
36 hours, I think, yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm just like, I was worn out by the end. It was awesome, but I was worn out. So I even wonder if there's a way to, and I get, God, coaches, like Packing 10, when he did that interview, I was like, man, he looks tired. Like, it's just, I wonder if we could split the tournament out over 2 weeks. You know what I mean? Where we have the preliminaries one week, and then we have the semis and the finals the next. I don't know if that would make things easier, but that could also be an option. Do you guys see a problem with that? I mean, give coaches and teams more time to prep, a little time to rest.
The
I think
biggest
that
thing,
generally improves the quality of the games, right?
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, if it's about improving the quality of the, which is something that it should be about, right? Like we should be trying
Mhm.
to improve the quality of the games, making it easier on these teams to perform at their best. Yeah, I don't see why that there would be too much of an issue with that. I guess the biggest thing is when this goes back to being played at stadiums that are being run by teams. How do you how do you make that work for teams, right? Like,
Oh, that's good. Yeah, that's a good point with the homestands and stuff.
and
Mhm.
that's like I think one of the things that I don't know how much thought has gone into that because like if you're an owner, part of the draw of the regular season games is you are guaranteed this many games, right? Like you have the gate that you're going to be collecting, the concessions, you're getting money from that, right?
That's
Like
a big portion of the money too, and where probably a lot of teams are upset this year because I mean that's a lot of money in beer and sodas that are $9 and nachos and merch.
so yeah. So you just have to figure out how you make it work. Like I think having these ideas is the first step. The second step is figuring out how do you best implement them into what is eventually going to be the format that sort of runs your league. Like you're seeing I think it's important to pay attention to the other league that is being run by Activision Blizzard and the CDL because they have gone strictly to the tournament formatting, right? Like they had the first week where they had a couple of teams play just like 2 games and you got tournament points off of that, but they have gone completely to that tournament system. So for me, it's like I think that you have to find a balance that's going to work, and this goes back to talking about like how do you keep ownership happy too? Like that is something that has to be factored into this as well.
Yeah, and that's probably why they decided not to do uh the stage playoffs is because of all the homestands happening that were supposed to happen in this season. It's probably why they came up with that, and it seems kind of lazy to me, but that's probably what the deal was. Oh, so um I don't know, like there was other things I like really wanted to look at. Oh, okay, so players. Players say that they don't practice as hard in scrims when it's not a tournament. Now, you guys, I want you to tell me why that's okay because I always come back to like me at my job. Like, do I not get to try as hard today because it's just a regular day at the office? I just don't. I feel like it's really
Who said
bad
that?
that people don't try. Reinforce was talking. He said he was talking to players, and they said they practiced harder because it was a tournament. And I've heard a lot of
Yeah.
players say that too. Jake, I think, said it on his podcast the other day too. But I can see how it happens, but it just makes me mad that someone would say that because I don't think anybody in professional sports is gonna say that they didn't try as hard.
Oh, there's
I
some
think
that will.
Yeah, I mean, practice? You're talking about practice? Yeah, I mean some, but I mean most of the time I don't think that's the case.
I think the framing of that is okay. So the thing really is am I going to practice 60 hours this week, of which I'm maybe 80% of the time engaged, or I'm going to practice 80 hours this week and going really hard in every scrim block. And also then after scrims directly jump into aim trainers, into solo queue, and this type of stuff. It's not like that anyone is slacking off 25 hours a week, right?
Yeah.
Um, it's and that depends from team to team. And I think there are teams that make it work with less time because also there's something to be said about professionals overworking themselves, and those that have mental health access or performance coaches generally have better performances despite not practicing as hardcore. Now, um, in terms of that, it's I think it's basically human psychology, and it's also resourcing your season. Like we talked about, for instance, that entire concept with New York Excelsior in season one, where it was like sandbagging or whatever, right?
Yeah.
And it was like soft confirmed by Arc that they
Yeah.
had to put the foot off the pedal because at some point, like it's too much, right? Like I think there is something like pacing that where you have to sort of like it's the problem is that we have is in sports it's like, oh yeah, okay, I look at his leg, it's kind of in a 90-degree angle, this guy's injured, right?
Yeah.
Like that isn't true for the mind. There's nothing that like if it gets to the point where you can physically see it, it's too late, right?
Yeah.
Like people are retiring at that point. So um and I think the stress of Hero Pulse was already so high that we already not only saw retirements, which we saw in the past, but retirements of huge names. It hasn't been a nice season for top players. If you just think,
Yeah.
even the ones that haven't retired, the absolute tippy top performers from last season didn't have a great time. I'm thinking Haksar, not playing. Fury, not playing that much, right? Like,
Yeah.
okay, Bumper is gone. Janu is now on a bottom tier team for now. Sinatra is not in the league anymore. Corey's not in the league anymore. Like being a top tier season 2 professional is not a great time apparently for in season 3, right? So yeah, I think the we cannot with our language as like 9 to 5 office guys cannot conceive it to mean the same thing that it does for the average person. It's like,
yeah, that's a good point. And
right,
you just
like,
made me think of something too. I guess honestly, with the 3-win possibility, you might try 3 times harder because it's not just for 1 win, it's for 3.
yeah.
So I didn't even think about that until, you were talking about it. But Lobo, you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, there's a reason why people like Michael Jordan, when they do a giant documentary on how he was as far as him as a player, people go, "Oh, that guy's a crazy person," because of how they are, how
Yeah.
maniacally focused on a single goal they
Yeah.
end up being. There's a reason why there's very few Michael Jordans in the world and there's a lot more John Stocktons in the world, right? Like
Mhm.
or guys who are really good players but they never actually win something. Like cuz it takes a certain level of dedication to be consistently the best. It's why it's so hard to keep the pedal down the entire time. It's also why you see a guy like Michael Jordan retire for a year and a half and he comes back and he's maybe better than he ever was. So there's something to say that yes, the mental side can and the consistent, you know, the amount of time that of practice that goes in doesn't mean that you're getting great practice. So I can understand why players would maybe feel that way. I feel like Reinforce is doing his former, brothers in arms a little bit of disservice when he like feels like he probably should have framed that a little bit better when he was talking about it for sure, because there's a lot more that goes into it than just they practice harder for a tournament than they do for
Well,
the other game.
I think he said
Mhm.
like they tried harder in practice. Like not
Well, right.
not not exactly that they practiced more. And I mean, Yiska, you made a really good point. Like it's pretty unfair for me to, judge from like my 9 to 5 how that's different from this and the stress that comes into putting it all into an hour match, like that is definitely an hour or 2 match. That's definitely a different thing I don't have to deal with.
Also keep in mind that like when you're working your job, most of the time, okay, it depends on your boss, but most of the time, the contents of your job don't radically change from week to week. While I can be one of the best players in the world, and then my heroes get banned, and now I'm on the bench, and this other
Yeah.
guy is playing ahead of me, and I'm like, I actually kind of want to play, right? And
Yeah.
then you play the next week, and then suddenly, once again, your heroes are banned, just in a flip flop way, right? So, for instance, there was this sequence when, like, if you were McCree Widow main, and those comps were actually playable, then that's a problem, right? We know that there are certain players that require that confidence of being, like, maybe the starter or have had problems accustoming themselves to the reality that teams are now built in in a more modular way, especially the great teams, which means a striker cannot play 100% of the season. Already couldn't last season. But when you need him, that's when he comes in. And that's what the value those specialists bring. Now, of course, we can talk about maybe you don't want that in the future. Maybe you want those hyperflex guys that always play, and we can build synergy there. But to be honest, there really hasn't been a small roster that, other than maybe Vancouver Titans for obvious reasons, that perform very well. Most of the time, you're getting rendered pretty weak by week-to-week hero pools by not having a larger roster and being able to make these substitutions. So it's a mental switch. Keep in mind, these are like when you get to the Overwatch League, 9 times out of 10, you were probably someone that was dominating contenders and most definitely like playing every game. And then you come into a pro team, and now you might only be second fiddle and sometimes get the chance to prove yourself. That is a showstopper in that regard, right? Like it's a completely mental shift that some of them aren't equipped to deal with or need help to get to that point. So I think that the empathetic point is to say, why do we not have guys that can help these players in these situations? And also, of course, it's a resource thing for a lot of these teams. Like some of the teams have big coaching staffs, some of them have very small ones. Like if you already only have 2 coaches, it's really hard to make one of them a performance coach, right? Like that's probably not possible, right? But ideally, as investment, as this entire thing keeps growing, hopefully we can then look at the investment and say, okay, what is actually the most effective dollar I can spend on staff? And I think it's performance coaches.
Also, it could be mental health professionals, but those are expensive. I mean, those like that's a doctor, that's an expensive thing to spend money on. But I think we're seeing a lot more reasons that it's really necessary, especially in esports, because of just looking at, introverts. I mean, a lot of these gamers are introverts, and being in the public eye probably gives tons of panic attacks, all kinds of different problems, and working through those is, you know, hard, and you need a professional to do that. But I don't know how you know, how you do that on certain budgets.
Mm-hmm.
And that, yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, that's the whole thing. Is like it is such a massive jump from contenders to Overwatch League. I think that people don't realize like the amount of spotlight that goes on the paradigm shift of being the best on your team to maybe not being even the second best on your team is something that people don't realize. I think that one specifically too is one that's very hard for some players to adjust to. So there's so much with the mental aspect of the game that maybe doesn't get talked about or that isn't understood that makes it harder for players to transition. But the other thing too is like you now have this player who he is part of something for 60 hours and he might not actually be doing anything for 30 of those hours or 40 of those hours. That can be a grind on somebody just as much as the guy who's playing for 40 hours too. And the amount of hours that these guys put in is crazy, and it's understandable why you maybe get up a little bit more for a tournament compared to a game that maybe doesn't quite matter as much. But that's also where having these performance coaches and these mental health coaches, why it's important to have people that can get them to understand why, maybe you do 40 hours instead of 60, but maybe you get better 40 hours than you would out of the 60 hours, right? Like that's where teams themselves have to figure out the adjustment, and also players themselves need to be more vocal about those the situations that they're in
Very
those
true.
scrim blocks and everything else too. I think that's one of the parts that's missing is the players being more vocal about
And there's something someone pointed out in chat. I guess maybe I didn't know what a performance coach is. Is that a mental health professional?
Yeah.
It can be, yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
Okay.
yeah. A lot of, for instance, I think I'm not sure what his background is, but the performance coach for the Gladiators, pretty sure is his name is HP4 Gamers on Twitter. He is like the and he's more like from the coming from the physical distressing. So he has a lot of stretching and like to me as a layman, it comes off like a lot of yoga type of stuff and relaxation in that regard. And also like just from having talked to Curry Shot, he's also a sound dude that gives you good life advice for those that have a tendency to work themselves to the bone to say, okay, you are actually more helpful to us if you don't go these to the length of skipping sleep or whatever.
Okay. Well,
That sometimes
it's crazy because I didn't know. I took performance coach at like face value and never really understood that it could be mental health type, services. So I guess I didn't know that. I just thought it was like performance on the field.
There's always for performance coaches, there's usually some sort of element of psychology in what they do too, like because that's as much a part of your performance as being able to physically perform on the field. If you just want to look at the if you don't want to if you want like a sports look at it too, like in sports, like mental health professionals and the performance coaches have become such a large part of different actual traditional sports too. Like LeBron James is like one of the guys who's at like sort of the forefront of some of the stuff, like especially with sleeping habits, where like he's a guy I think that like it's like 12 hours of sleep or something, like stuff like that too. Like that part of it goes into it as well, which isn't really something physical. Obviously you're sleeping, but it goes into helping you mentally as well if to get the sleep that
yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. All right. So, what about the breaks? Do you think this is like, we're having this like 3 week break? Do you think this is something that could be healthy for the league going forward, even after COVID, and even possibly make it easier to do home stands and things of that nature?
I think it's okay. Like it's like esports is not like leagues that have been going on for a long time in esports, like just thinking of League of Legends, like there's usually a little bit of a break from the start of MSI and then after MSI. Like this is nothing new in esports and those leagues do just fine. So I think 3 weeks maybe is a little long, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm okay with the fact that they are promoting pretty hard contenders in that time. As somebody who does contenders myself as a caster, so
Yeah.
like that is a nice thing that you get out of this. But yeah, I don't think it's a massive issue.
Yeah. I always personally had the theory that breaks, and maybe not 3 weeks long, but 2 weeks long, 1 week
Yeah.
long, actually facilitate change. Maybe not as radical as people want it to be, but that, for instance, like think back, the 3 TPS stuff that Shanghai Dragons was pretty much coming out or being fleshed out after the midseason um,
Mhm.
break.
Yep.
The same is true for Sombra Goats, where the league suddenly started playing Sombra Goats. And of course, I empathize with people who say, yeah, it's still Goats. I'm not feeling it, right? But like the changes keep happening when you give people the opportunity. And generally it's a good thing probably to de-stress the league and also viewership. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Like if I'm esports viewers, I think a lot of us aren't actually viewing esports in the same way that sports fans do. Like
Mhm.
I was a fan of Bayern Munich. I didn't watch any other games than the game from Bayern Munich every week. Like
Same. Yeah. Same with
I
the
watched
NFL.
one match, and then maybe if a banger was on, I would watch that as well. And otherwise, I would catch the highlight.
Yep.
In Overwatch, I try to catch as many games as possible to absorb all kinds of storylines that are happening because storylines is the product for me anyway. So viewer fatigue is also a real thing that needs to be incorporated in each schedule that you're making. And I always thought like after stage, making it like a week break, so after stage playoffs or whatever, then the weak teams have 2 weeks of breaks. that lets them catch up and reinvent themselves, gives them the opportunity. And also, like, if you're a bad team, you probably shouldn't be playing the meta composition to the fullest, because you're probably not going to catch up. You should reinvent the wheel, and you're given the opportunity to innovate. And I think if that was consistently done, we would have seen more innovation than we did. Now, whether or not that would have made people happy, like the rate of innovation that we would have seen, I don't know. But yeah, I think breaks are in general, like across the board for everyone. Elongate the season. Like, we already have such a long off season. World Cup doesn't mean as much anymore. You don't put as much resources into it anymore. Why not just drag out the season? Of course, yes. I'm saying this very simply, when in fact it's like, like broadcasting contracts and all that type of stuff.
Yeah.
Where it's like, probably someone's like, yeah, from a competitive integrity point of view and from a viewership point of view, it makes a lot of sense, but nobody's giving us money for that, which is fair enough, right? I'm saying, if that is possible at all, in order to still get doable deals, then that's probably the preferable situation.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Like, longer season, but spaced out more. I definitely like that. Sorry, Lobo, go ahead.
It's funny because the Overwatch League, with some of the way that they've structured things, has always felt like they wanted to be the NFL of esports, where they kind of miss what makes the NFL such a draw. One is the fact that there's 16 games, so every single regular season game in the NFL has the utmost importance. Part of the reason why there's only 16 games is because of how physically demanding the sport is. Overwatch is a little bit different kind of a demand as far as what it is, but there's no viewership fatigue for the NFL because you have your 16 weeks and then you have your playoffs and that's it. Like, there's a finite amount of time to watch the NFL happen. And like, that was something that they never really seemed to understand. They try to like take other things that didn't really necessarily work with what they were trying to do. Like, we had over 40 games that were played in season 1.
Yep.
Like, that's a lot of games for one team to go through. That was more, and
Especially
this
for
was like,
Shanghai.
yeah, right. 0-40, yeah. So that was always like the thing that confused me the most, is like, if you're going to try and borrow things from sports, try and borrow the things that are going to work for what you're trying to do, but that also work for specifically that thing that can actually maybe translate over. And I always felt like that was something that they never really understood. So, like, having these breaks, I think, is a good thing to do. I think learning from your past mistakes is a nice thing that you can have. And as far as iteration too, it's funny where that is one thing where Overwatch League mirrors the NFL very, very nicely, where teams in the Overwatch League seemed, it always felt like they were afraid to innovate, right? Like,
Yes.
innovation in the NFL never came from the NFL. It always came from college football, which is where all of the players who end up making the NFL get their start anyways. And like, you think about the Overwatch League, Contenders is where a lot of the innovation happened. Where did Goats come from? Right? Like, it was a team that, like you said, Yiska, they had nothing, they had to do something in order to keep themselves relevant. So I'm happy with the fact that they're straying away from traditional sports models that don't work with Overwatch. Like they need to realize what Overwatch is.
Well,
Yeah.
and we talk about viewer fatigue, right? And I'm nuts, right? I watch all these freaking games, and if I get fatigued, I can't imagine what a just, casual viewer gets. They're definitely not watching every game, and so I actually like the idea. Initially, I was like, "What? We're not getting more till June 13th." But then I thought to myself, "Well, shit, I'm tired from everything that's gone on." Like, that's
Yeah.
good. Like, once it
Yeah.
sunk in, I thought, "Okay, this is okay." But then, doing a weekly show, you think, "Well, what the heck am I going to talk about?" And then you get stressed out about that, and so
hmm
a little bit is my own, my own wanting it just for me and not thinking about what it's like for the consumer and the viewer.
Are you guys ready for one of my more esoteric ideas, where it's like, okay, you're on thin
right.
ice, Yiska. Maybe
Do it.
okay.
I-
So
Yeah.
so here's the idea, right? What's a sports fan? It's like a person that in very regular um intervals goes to the stadium and
Mhm.
watches it, or stays home. But every like a fan can every weekend expect during the season can expect this team to play. The interval depends on the sports. I know baseball
Right.
is crazy for some
Baseball,
reason, but
yeah, yeah, I don't like
162 games,
baseball.
yep.
It's crazy.
okay. So the act is, especially like European football, is every weekend you either travel to another city or you go stay home. You
Mhm.
travel to the a place, a physical space where you meet, watch games, and sing with people and have a great time.
I
The
love
regularity
that
of that
about
habit.
about how football and soccer works its way in America
Mhm.
now too. But the singing and all the chanting, it's freaking awesome. Sorry, off to it's a
So
completely off topic, but yeah, it's awesome.
okay, here's the esoteric idea, and I don't want to offend anyone with in terms of religion, but in some way, the habits of that are come off as almost spiritual to me, where you're part
It
of
is.
this group, right? Like it's like you're watching basically like just like scripture happening on the field, and you're chanting towards it, and you're the togetherness of the entire experience. Now that cannot happen in Overwatch League with 2 homestands this season,
Nope.
right?
Right.
You don't have that habit of like, oh yeah, what am I going to do on Sunday? Like, or on the weekend. Oh yeah, one day is sports, right?
Yep.
And before we have that, there cannot be a regularity where it almost seeps into the identity of the people that, oh, who are you? Oh yeah, I'm among other things, like that's my job, and I'm a father, but I'm also a Florida Mayhem fan. That's very unlikely to occur if that's not part of your regular um, schedule,
Your
and
ritual,
that's
right?
not a
Yeah.
Yeah,
problem.
ritual. Yep.
Yes, especially yes, ritual is the correct word for all of this, right? And that's fine that it cannot be this way, but then we got to create the system of the league in a different way. We cannot then immediately call it like try to become this ritual. We got to look at the realities of what the viewers are doing and not try to force them into these systems when we haven't done the prerequisites of building this religion that we're trying to raise with this esport, right? So I always thought it's like, in some ways, we are getting the producers in that never actually raised a sport from the ground, but the
Yeah.
maintenance guy that kept this thing going.
Yep.
And what does he know about building a sport?
Nothing. Because he was at a
So
sport that was already built.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and that's
that's
a good point. That's probably why Dallas is so popular because they've been building their brand in, Texas for a long time. And that might be why the home stand was so nuts. And I will say you don't get everybody singing and, you know, going crazy like at at soccer/slash football games, but you do get some pretty big hype for those, but maybe I don't know. We've seen it work though. We've seen them sell out stadiums, and I really wish we could have seen more this season because I wasn't
mhm.
sure everybody was going to sell out, and I really wanted to see the differences in teams. Like if you could sell out Washington,
Mhm.
like who can't sell out? But I mean, like Washington did do good towards the end of the season last year. That could have been why they sold the first one out. So I'm super curious to that, but I don't really have any ideas on what we could actually do. You look like
Well,
you had
this
something,
is
Lobo.
well, this is like also where looking at the CDL comes into play because the CDL wasn't having the same sort of success with their home stands that the Overwatch League was.
Mhm.
So I think this is where where it is unfortunate that we don't have more home stands to see how it would have gone. But how would the rest of the CDL homes tournaments have done compared to the home stands that Overwatch League had been doing? Like that was something I was really curious in because like I think it was the Atlanta Phase, I think, is the CDL team. Like their homestand, like there are a lot of empty seats. I was actually surprised by how many, especially because the Phase are a pretty good team in the CDL and all this other stuff. So, I think that those things are important to consider. And it's funny because like literally football, the NFL, it's called the church of the NFL sometimes by people because that's what's people's Sunday ritual. Literally the day
Mm,
that you're supposed to go to church, a lot of people go and watch football instead.
mhm.
I've
I
literally
thought that
missed
comparison was really good.
I've missed multiple weddings because of Chiefs games. I'm not kidding. And my
Oh my
family
god.
knows not to do anything during a Chiefs game unless the Chiefs game's going to be on. Like I
Yeah.
have to see it. And that's was even when they were, like most of my life through all their times of being horrible and knowing they're not going to win and still,
Just a lot of your life too.
yeah, but now they're awesome. So, oh man, but yeah, but either way though, I do like that they're doing a bunch of different stuff. Some people seem upset, some people seem like they love it, but it is definitely like you said earlier, Labasco, with the COVID-19 and the season being basically kind of a wash. If you're going to look at the season overall, this is a great way to bring it back. Now, I am curious how they're going to do the June thing. They said tournaments coming back in June, right? But you think they mean like a games leading up just like we had before and then the tournament? I feel like that's what they meant to say, but everybody just saw tournament.
They didn't really make it clear, so who knows? Like I think that was sort of the point from them to say it that way is because
Get us
it
talking.
leaves well, it gets us talking, but it also gives them the flexibility to what does that mean specifically, right? Like it doesn't have to mean that it's exactly the same as the man-made. They can make a change to it and well, people can't be like, "Well, you didn't say that's what was going to happen," because they didn't say that it was going to be exactly like the May Melee, right? So I think part of that is giving themselves room for if they want to make changes that they can and they're taking and it seems like they're taking this time to figure out how exactly they want to do it because if they knew how they wanted June to go, they would have given it to us already.
Or
Yeah.
and maybe they would have, but maybe this break, is going to show them that breaks are good too.
Hopefully.
I
Yeah.
don't know. After the melee, the break has definitely been good. Oh, but let's kind of wrap this up. But the last thing I wanted to talk about, I wanted to know if you guys, well, okay, my favorite thing I've ever seen on the broadcast is the commercial with the tea bag, uh, where he's like, "Do you know what I'm doing right now, John? You can hear it," and he's just dropping the tea bag in and out of the cup. That's my favorite of all time. But Sideshow's announcement of them coming back in June, I thought was epically done. I thought it was hilarious. Where did you guys see it? He's like,
He's walking through all the
yeah, he's like,
different
"Where's everybody at? Bread?" And he walks over, and then he's bread, and then he walks over, and he's in Zoe's spot. Then he walks over to Uber's spot, and Uber actually talks. He like talks just with Uber's voice. I thought it was
re-
hilarious.
yeah,
Mm.
reinforces standing on a box. He's not as tall as everyone thinks he is. Yeah.
I mean, I think Monty always pushed for. He thought like more of those fun types of things. Like he really wanted, season one. The the Watchpoint show was very different than later on. It was a lot of antics. Him coming out, Judge Monty, and doing the skits. Do you guys think that's something that they could start bringing back?
I don't know why it ever left.
Yeah. It works so well in other scenes as well. Like LAC is notoriously good at this. Like
Yeah.
their meme game is on point. They incorporate a lot of creativity. I will also say it was kind of unfortunate that um, shoulder content, especially at the time, didn't get as much traction. But maybe also could have been like if I'm already watching 20 hours of Overwatch a week, am I really going to watch 21 hours, even though if that 1 hour is super funny and insightful and hilarious, like it's really hard to create shoulder content, successful shoulder content in Overwatch anyway, in comparison to other esports from the numbers. And yeah, I think especially with the guys that they have, like they have everyone that they need. Like just like give Brian Sideshow resources, and they're going to create hilarious stuff for you.
Yep. Just keep Brent
So-
out of tights, though. No tights.
I don't think you're gonna be able to do that with Bren, unfortunately. But it's like one of the things that people always talk about is like sometimes the desk isn't as fun as it can be and all that, and it's yeah, I especially like people who had been on the desk previously, like there's a reason why some people's favorite desks are the World Cup ones that have been run by Golden Boy, right? Like because of how those were. And sort of the model of that is from other esports that are successful with it. And traditional sports too have desks that are a lot of fun that people really enjoy. Like if you're an NBA fan, like people love the desk with Charles Barkley and Shaq and Kenny. Like there are other, like it's not just esports where this can work too. And I think what makes it most unfortunate is like why is it that the shoulder content isn't as popular as in other places? And it's definitely not because they lack the talent of the people in the positions doing it. There's something else more inherently going on than what meets the eye.
Yeah, I think Yiska nailed it because just watching that many games, it's hard to watch the shoulder content. If
Yeah.
people, I'm sure the people that were watching the shoulder content were the people that are only catching a couple games, and wanting to get, an update of what all the other games they didn't watch were. But I think initially the excitement was pretty high where people were watching a ton of games and maybe even getting burnt out. There's all kinds of layers there, but I just thought that was great, and I just want more of more of that. All right, well, unless you guys have something else to add, I think we're gonna end the show for the week. All right, crickets.
Nothing.
We're ending it now. All right. So if you want to follow us, you can follow us on Twitter at @OwlRecap. If you want to send us a little bit longer something, contact at owlrecap.com. We usually stream Monday nights live on twitch.tv/owlrecap. There will not be a show tomorrow, just heads up. There'll be another one coming the week after. If you want to join our Discord, it's discord.me/omniclab. And you could also, of course, always find us on every podcatcher, everything Spotify, Apple, whatever you like to listen on. Oh man, I want to thank you guys for coming on. Like, this was a good time. I'm gonna let you guys give out your socials and your shows and stuff. We'll start with Labasco. Where can we find you?
Just go to Twitter at Labasco. You'll see me posting about, whatever's going on at the current time. Obviously, with what's going on right now, a lot of it is trying to spread awareness of things that you can do to help with everything going on from Minnesota and just everywhere else around the US. So whether it's places to donate or anything else, because Black lives do matter, and it's something that we should be paying attention to and
Heck
trying to
yeah.
do our best to help out. So that's been a lot of mine, but obviously you can hear about like whatever contenders stuff and whatever Overwatch stupid things I want to say. That's the place to do it. And then of course you can go listen to Push the Point with me and Ramses as we will ramble on about whatever Overwatch stuff there is to talk about that week.
Awesome. And Yiska, where can we find you?
As always, like you see it down here, at Yiska Out. Technical Crouch, we're recording tomorrow again with Albert from Mayhem. That should be a good one. He requested it, so I assume he has something to say, but maybe he just wants to be there when they're on top right now. So we'll see. But and other than that, I of course like that's my full-time job is at GG Recon, writing about Valorant and Overwatch.
Awesome. Yeah, Tactical Crouch is great. I think one of my favorite things in Tactical Crouch, I have a bunch, but it's how John loves to say that he doesn't know anything about Overwatch and he's a smooth brain and all this, but when he's right, he will throw that in your face over and
he
over
will.
again. And when he's wrong, he's like, "See, I don't know anything. What are you talking about?"
The thing is,
it's
when
good
he
stuff.
goes hard on something, he probably also is right. Like he's just like
Yeah, he knows.
snake that.
Yeah, he knows a lot more than he lets on. But it's a great show, great guys. So
Thank you.
I will. If you want to find me, it's on Twitter. It's Blazzin_Bob. That's BLAZZIN_BOB. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week.